This is an introductory lesson on voiceover gestures for the iPad. Gestures refer to a particular way of touching the screen, such as using a single finger and tapping once, or two fingers and tapping twice, or three fingers and tapping twice, swiping from left to right with one or two fingers. Any particular way of touching the screen is referred to as a gesture. And gestures are one of the ways that you can provide input to the accessibility feature called VoiceOver. The other way is with a physical keyboard. And before we start learning the individual gestures that allow us to control VoiceOver and access the iPad, I want to explain a concept that's part of the VoiceOver system, which is the focus. So the VoiceOver focus is what we're talking about. And I would liken the VoiceOver focus to a mouse cursor on the computer. It is sort of the thing that you are directing the computer to focus on, that you would like to soon interact with. And on the iPad, there is a visual representation of the focus, which comes in the form of a white border or a box drawn around a particular item on the screen. So for those of you who have low vision, I'm going to zoom in on a portion of the screen right now. And we have the icon of the App Store in the middle of the screen, and around it is this white border. And that border, again, represents what's called the focus. If I were to touch some element on the screen, whether it is an icon for an app, or a bit of text, or a hyperlink, or really anything, if I touch that thing, then VoiceOver will announce what I touched, and it will draw this box, it will draw this focus on that item. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to touch a different item on the screen. I'll touch podcasts.
Podcasts. Double tap to open.
And when I touched podcast, the border, the focus, moved from App Store to podcasts. The focus is the item that we are ready to interact with on the iPad. For instance, if I wanted to listen to a podcast, and to do so I wanted to launch the podcast app, I'm now ready to do that because the focus is drawn around it. Now, I would not have to see where on the screen podcast is. In fact, I can make the screen go totally dark and demonstrate how I could open the podcast app without being able to see anything at all.
Screen curtain on.
So I just turned on something called the screen curtain. It makes the entire screen of the iPad go dark, so I am effectively using it the way that someone who's blind would use it right now. And I'm going to do a different gesture. I'm going to do a left swipe with one finger. And this is going to move the focus from podcast backwards one item to App Store. And we'll hear it announce App Store when I do that.
App Store.
So if I were to re-enable the screen to turn off the screen curtain right now and display the icons again, we would see that white border, that box drawn around the icon for App Store rather than podcasts. So I'll do that.
Screen curtain off.
And here it is. There's that white border drawn around the App Store icon. Like I was saying before, I can touch anything and move the focus to the thing that I touch.
Podcasts. Double tap to open.
But let's say that I wanted now to actually open the podcast app. I don't have to be able to see this white border. I don't have to be able to see the icon for podcasts. So I'm going to turn the screen curtain back on to prove that I can open podcasts without having to see it, without having to touch it.
Screen App Store.
So,
podcasts.
So the screen curtain is back on. I can see nothing. I last heard VoiceOver announced podcasts, so I know that it has the focus around it. If I were to do a different gesture that moves the focus, like a swipe like I did before,
App Store.
I now know that App Store has the focus around it, but I want it to be on podcast, so I'm going to move it with my right swipe to make it go forward one item.
Podcasts.
And because the iPad announced podcast, I know that it has the focus. And here is where the real beauty of VoiceOver comes. The fact that I don't need to see podcast, and then I can do another gesture that tells VoiceOver I want to open the podcast app anywhere on the screen. Doesn't matter whether it's in the upper left corner, upper right corner, middle of the screen, does not matter where I do this next gesture that I'm about to do. And the gesture to activate or interact with the item that has the focus is a lot like double clicking your mouse on the computer. So the gesture is a single finger double tap, and that means that I'm going to tap on the screen twice in very quick succession. I can't go tap, tap. That would be too slow. It has to be tap, tap, nice and quick. So I'm going to do that now. Tap, tap. And we heard this little
Podcasts.
We heard this little clicking sound, which is a soundbite it makes when it's opening an app, and then it announced podcasts. So now when I turn the screen curtain back, when I turn the screen curtain off and we can see the screen again.
Screen curtain off. Browse. Tab. 3 of 4.
We are now in the Podcasts app. And I'm going to go back to my main screen.
Suggestions.
And now that you have an idea of what the VoiceOver focus is, the first thing that I want to teach you is some different methods of moving the focus around, because that is really the most fundamental, most important thing to know how to do when you're using VoiceOver, is get the focus onto the icon or onto the hyperlink or onto the button or whatever it may be that you want to interact with. And so one of the ways I've already mentioned is I can simply touch something if I'm able to see it, and that will put the focus there. The thing that I touched will be announced. So I could simply touch podcasts if my vision is good enough to do that. Another way that I can move the focus around is very similar. I can touch the screen but leave my finger on the screen and simply drag my finger around, and as I move to new things that the focus could possibly select, it will, and it will announce them. So I'm going to start up at the very top left of my screen. I'm going to touch there.
Sheets.
And as I
Docs.
drag my finger,
Books.
whenever
Home.
I touch something
Dropbox.
new,
Mapkeeper. D&D spell 5e. Notes. Maps. Clock.
whenever I touch something new by dragging my finger and keeping it in contact with the screen, the focus moves to where my finger is at that moment. It draws the border around the thing that my finger is touching, and it reads it out loud. But there's a much more systematic way of moving the focus from item to item. In fact, we can move the focus forward one item at a time, backward one item at a time, and there's even some gestures that we can do to make the focus move on its own continuously, sort of reading the entire screen without having to make the same gesture over and over again. But probably the most fundamental gesture that is used to move the focus is what most people would call a right and a left swipe, or some people call it a right and left flick. So what that means is we're going to take a single finger. I usually use my dominant hand index finger, and I'm going to, you could kind of pretend like you're flicking a breadcrumb off of the screen. There's a little speck there, and you're reaching out and you're swiping it off the screen. A really critical thing about performing this motion, this gesture, is that when your finger first touches the screen, it already needs to be moving laterally. It needs to be moving sideways as you touch the screen. Because if you touch the screen in a static way and keep it still for a moment, remember that that is going to cause the focus to move to what you touch. So if I touch podcasts without being in motion as I do it, the focus jumps to podcasts. But that's not what I'm trying to do now. I want the focus to move one item at a time from left to right, kind of in the way that we would read, left to right across a row, and then when it finishes that row, to begin the next row. So instead of touching and then sliding, I want to already be moving sideways when my finger first touches the screen. So I'm going to do a right swipe, which is going to cause the focus here on podcasts to jump to the next item over on the same row, which in this case is going to be music. And here's the gesture itself now.
Music.
Now I can go backwards by swiping in the opposite direction. If I go from right to left,
Podcasts.
the focus moves backwards rather than forwards. The motion itself does not need to be very big. We don't need to swipe a long distance across the screen to get the iPad to recognize that we're doing a right or a left swipe. It can be as little as like half an inch. But the critical thing, just to reiterate, is that we're in motion when we touch the screen. So this is what the gesture can be like when it's performed a little bit more quickly, making smaller motions instead of grandiose big motions.
Apps, TV, product, notes, maps, clock, OneNote, camera, D&D spell.
So I'm really just keeping my fingers straight, and I'm just flexing my wrist back and forth and lifting my finger slightly when I off the screen as I come back to the right, and then touching the screen as I'm in motion,
Mapkeeper, home,
swiping to the left
books,
to go backwards.
Docs, sheets.
And then similarly, if I want to go forwards, I just need to swipe to the right and be in motion, going from left to right when my finger contacts the screen.
Docs, books, home, Mapkeeper, D&D spell.
So that is probably, those two are probably the most fundamental gestures for all of using VoiceOver, is being able to advance the focus one item at a time. And it may take several swipes to get to where you're going, but it's still a foolproof method of moving the focus around to eventually get it to where you want to go. And I did it pretty quickly a moment ago, but once you get the hang of this, you can swipe extremely quickly by using those really small motions. I'm going to show you about how fast I can get the focus to go by doing that. So you're not even giving it enough time to talk and announce the thing that has the focus. I'm going so fast. Okay, so now just to recap what we have learned so far. Fundamental thing to understand about VoiceOver is this concept of the focus. It is the item on the screen that was last announced, the item on the screen that has the little box drawn around it, and it's the thing on the screen that we are poised to interact with. So if it's a button, we are poised to press that button if it has the focus. If it's a link, we are poised to open the link and go to where it takes us if that link has the focus. If it is an app, we are poised to open and begin using the app if it has the focus. So another way of moving the focus around, instead of sort of manually one item at a time like this, is we can cause the iPad to move the focus continuously and make it read the screen to us. And there are two new gestures to learn related to making the focus read continuously. They both involve two fingers, and as we learn some more of these gestures, you'll start to notice that related gestures use similar numbers of fingers or similar swipes or numbers of taps, and that there is some logic to what gestures do what things. So the next two gestures that we're going to learn both involve two fingers, and they involve either swiping up with two fingers or swiping down with two fingers, and that's going to cause the iPad to start reading continuously. The difference between the two is whether we're swiping up or down, and if we take our two fingers and we swipe upwards with both of them, the iPad will move the focus to the very first item on the screen. In this case, it'll be the icon for Google Sheets, and then it will read from left to right until it reaches the very end of what is on the screen at that moment. And when it reaches the end, we'll hear a little bump sound that'll go like bump. And that sound bite is telling us that VoiceOver has reached the end and that it can go no further. There's nothing left to be read. So very similar to how we needed to be in motion when we were doing our right and left swipes the moment that we came into contact with the screen, the same is true when we're doing these two finger swipes up or down. We want to be in motion as we touch the screen. So I'm going to perform the two finger up swipe, which again makes the focus jump from wherever it may be to the first item on the screen, and it starts reading continuously from there.
Chrome, YouTube, 1004, camera, Chrome, YouTube, 1448 new items, music folder, 4 apps, Safari, Drive, Files, Photos, Settings, 2 new items, Letterpop, Amazon Alexa, Podcasts.
And it may have been quiet on the recording there, but we just heard the little bump sound I was referring to. Right now, the focus is down here at the very bottom right. It has reached the end of the page. That's why we heard the bump sound. So if I were to make a swipe to the right, I'm telling VoiceOver with that gesture that I want it to continue reading going forward from where it is, but there's nowhere to go. It is essentially up against the wall. So if I did that, we would hear the same bump sound.
Suggestions. Podcasts.
And it continues to announce the last thing that the focus can select, but just before it says podcast, we're hearing that bump sound.
Podcasts.
Okay. Now, I'm going to just simply touch some icon somewhere in the middle of the screen. I'll touch App Store.
Apps. Podcasts. Apps. Podcasts. App Store.
And now I'm going to do the other two-finger gesture, the two-finger swipe downwards. The difference between this one and swiping upwards is that instead of the focus moving to the first item on the screen, it's going to start from where it currently is. So two-finger swipe down.
App Store. Podcasts. Music. Mail. No unread emails. Instagram. Chess folder. 2 apps. Netflix.
And I'm
Pets folder.
going to stop it from finishing reading the screen now. And it's actually something I've been doing throughout this whole video. I've been taking two fingers and touching the screen, tapping on it once, and making those two fingers touch at the exact same time. And what that gesture is it is muting the output of VoiceOver. It's making it stop reading and to freeze the focus wherever it is in that particular moment. It's an extremely useful gesture because if you start to use VoiceOver a lot, there will be times when it is simply talking too much and you instantly want to silence it because it's interrupting your thought process or whatever it may be. And so you will end up using this two-finger single tap gesture an awful lot to make VoiceOver simply stop reading. So I'm going to make it start again and then I will demonstrate that.
Chrome. YouTube.
Two-finger,
1404.
one tap, instantly silences it. So very useful gesture. And notice that all of the gestures that we've been doing just now, these two-finger ones, two-finger swipe up, two-finger swipe down, two-finger single tap, they all kind of relate to the iPad reading. It's either read from the beginning, read from the current position, or stop reading, or mute. Okay, so now let's get to some of the a little bit more advanced gestures. So far we've done just one and two-finger gestures. Let's learn some that involve 3 fingers. I think a good example for this first 3-finger gesture that I want to teach would be if we went into a long list of something, such as contacts. Now I'm not sure if I have many contacts in this iPad. I'm going to have Siri open it for me. Open contacts.
Possible text. 2:01 p.m. Friday, February 14th.
Open contacts. Okay.
Contacts.
So I do have a good amount of contacts here. That's good for demonstration purposes. The gesture that I'm going to teach is a way to, I would draw an analogy between it and the page up and page down keys on a computer, if you're familiar with those. It is a way to move up and down through a long list of items without having to go one item at a time, being able to skip several rows or several list items at once. So I'm going to put the focus, the VoiceOver focus, within my list of contacts. I could simply by touching, if I could see where those contacts names are, but if I wasn't able to see, and let's say that I am not, I'm going to put on the screen curtain again.
Screen curtain.
So I put on the screen curtain. You heard VoiceOver start to announce it, and I didn't want VoiceOver to talk over me, so I did my two-finger single tap to instantly make it be silent. Now what I'm going to do now is move the focus forward until I hear it start to announce names of people that I have in my contacts. How am I going to do that? Well, I have at least 2 different ways, even though the screen is totally dark. One would be to simply do right swipes, which will move the focus forward one item at a time until I get there. I could also do my 2-finger up swipe or down swipe to make it start reading continuously from where it is until it gets there. But I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm just going to do my right swipes until I get into my contacts.
Add. Button. Contacts. Heading.
Quick note here. When VoiceOver uses the word heading, it is telling you that that is text. It's not a link, it's not a button or anything like that. It's simply text, but it is a heading. It is bolded text that kind of signifies the beginning of a new section. So I just heard it say contacts heading, I know that I'm about to get into my list of contacts pretty soon. Another right swipe to keep moving forward.
Search. Search field. Dictate. Button. Section index. Adjustable. Selected. Aaron.
And now I have heard the first name in my contacts. I could, let's say that I have 100 or more contacts. I could do right swipes to move one contact at a time down the list.
Aron Rabi at Gmail. Kenny Abrames. Seth Abrames. Adam. Alyssa. Amanda.
You know, and I'm still in the A's now. I have lots of contacts. I haven't even gotten to letter B yet. But let's say that I wanted to find somebody whose last name starts with S or even Z, and I need to get way down the list much more quickly. That is the purpose of this gesture that I'm going to teach you now. This is the first one that we're going to learn that involves three fingers. And I want you to think of this gesture as if you had a piece of paper with contacts written on it, and you're pushing that paper away from yourself so that the bottom part of the page comes more into your field of vision. So if you were to push the paper up and away from you, you would be focusing more on the lower half of it. Whereas if you pulled the paper closer to you, you would be bringing the top half of the paper more into view. So in some ways, this gesture is a little bit counterintuitive. If I want to go down the list, I actually swipe upwards. Because again, think of it as pushing a piece of paper away from you so that the bottom half comes more into your field of view. So now I'm going to do a three-finger up swipe, and as before, it's important that my hand is in motion when it comes into contact with the screen, and that all three fingers touch at once. So I try to put a little bit of space between my fingers. It's okay if it's difficult for you to spread them and you need to keep them together. But what is critical is that all three fingers touch at once. Because if we touch two and then a third, the iPad thinks that we're trying to do a two-finger gesture, which does something different. So all three fingers touching at once, and they should all be in motion, moving upwards as they do so. So here goes.
Rows 11 to 28 of 175.
And so when I did that, the focus advanced several rows, and that's why it announced which rows were currently on the screen. I can do it again to keep going down the list of contacts.
Rows 25 to 42 of 100, rows 39 to 56 of 107, rows 54 to 71 of 100, rows 68 to 80.
So it's going about 15 rows at a time. That's saving me 15 right swipes each time I do a three-finger up swipe. So I'm going to continue to do my three-finger up swipes until I get to the very bottom of my contacts.
Rows 81 to 9, rows 94 to 100, rows 107 to 1, rows 121 to 100, rows 134 to, rows 149 to 166 of 175. Rows 161 to 175 of 175.
And so now I'm at the bottom. And I will take the screen curtain off.
Screen curtain off.
And if we were to look at my list of contacts here, we can see that I'm in the W's, which is the last letter that I even have in my contacts. And so almost every gesture that has a directional swipe to it has a counterpart. So the three-finger up swipe has a counterpart, the three-finger down swipe, which will do the exact opposite of going down the list. It's going to take me back up my list alphabetically.
Rows 100, rows 100, rows 120.
And as with the other gestures, once you get the hang of this, you can perform them really quickly. You can go swipe, 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 swipe with all three fingers.
Rows 1 to 15 of 1.
And there I had 175 or so contacts, and I was able to zap from the very bottom to the very top using that three-finger gesture instead of swiping over and over and over and over again, which is what I would have to do if I was doing the single-finger right and left swipes. Okay, let's go back to our main screen.
Dog.
And now I'm going to show you three-finger sideways swipes, so swiping to the right or to the left with three fingers. It's kind of similar to what we just did in that it very quickly moves through a lot of content, but when we do these sideways swipes with three fingers, it's going to change pages rather than skip through many rows. So on my home screen, as it is set up now, I just have 2 pages worth of home screen. We're on one of them now. But I have another one that I would need that would be towards the right. And so, just like with the